Hello and welcome to the weekly commodity market update. I'm Brownfield's Will Robinson, joined as always by the University of Missouri's Ben Brown. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Will. How are you? Did you have a
I,
good weekend?
I did have a good weekend. So I was in North Platte, Nebraska, and for listeners and viewers who might not know, that's basically dead center in Nebraska out there for a wedding. It was a good time, a little hot, but what's really nice is I come back, here Monday and Tuesday on my way into work this morning. We're getting a lot of rainfall here in mid-Missouri, so
Finally,
finally.
finally.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully, everyone listening across the Corn Belt, they're getting their needed moisture. I know, well, I can't say that what's going on here is I guess an image of what's going on everywhere, but it's kind of nice to finally get some rain back.
Yeah, how'd the corn look in Nebraska?
Well, that's the weird thing. So I was assuming that the further west I went, the worse it'd be. But once you got that North Platte area, maybe stretching over to Kearney, it looked pretty good. But once you got east of Kearney, actually, in between Kearney and Lincoln, a lot of that quality was going downhill. And, it didn't seem like it was getting that adequate moisture. So it was a little bit rough there. But overall, not as drawn back as I would have thought. But maybe that's a comment on some of the hybrids that are available out there now, and really the technology within the corn itself.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. I drove to Chicago yesterday and I saw some incredibly good looking corn and soybeans driving across eastern Illinois into up towards northeast Chicago. So
Yeah, well,
we're good looking.
it's kind of weird because there's patches that look all right, and there's patches right next to that might not. It's just been the year we've had, but we're really jumping into things and getting an update on markets. Where are we sitting today, and really how did we get here?
Yeah, let's look at week over week changes in prices. Old crop corn for September down a penny to $5.96. New crop corn for December up 6 cents to $6 even. Old crop soybeans in August up 23 cents to 15.01. New crop soybeans for November up 14 cents to 13.74. Looking at those different soybean components, soybean oil fell another 3 cents. But soybean meal up $22.30 per short ton. And then winter wheat, or at least new crop wheat for September, down 21 cents to $7.89.
So obviously some decent adjustments there. What kind of highlights are we seeing from last week into this week?
Yeah. So last week we had not an overly busy week, just pretty much the same type of reports that we normally have. U.S. weekly ethanol production increased 29,000 barrels per day last week, which I thought was a good signal, given this is when we normally see ethanol plants closed for maintenance. Export sales on the week were 1.3 million bushels for corn, down from the 2.3 million bushels the week before. Export sales were up for soybeans compared to 3 straight weeks of more cancellations than net new sales. Export sales were up for grain sorghum, but down for wheat. However, wheat came in at 18.8 million bushels, just down from 37.4 the week before. But that was a very strong week for wheat. Managed money accounts sold off from their net long positions of corn and soybeans while buying back some net short positions of Chicago wheat. We continue to shrink out of that net long in corn. We are not in a net long position for corn anymore. I think we're at a much more moderate level of managed money holdings of corn. We also had the cattle on feed and cattle inventory reports on Friday, which our colleagues Megan and Scott tackle. But I think it was important to note that we continue to reduce that cattle herd. Placements were down, and certainly the heifer numbers in slaughter have been elevated to explain that. Export inspections were down for corn, grain sorghum, and soybeans week over week, but up for wheat. All were within pre-report trading ranges with 5 weeks left in the marketing year. Corn and soybeans are closing up here, and we can start to see some minor adjustments. Soybeans are right on the pace needed, while corn lags about 4% from what we need. And then probably the big news over the weekend: Ukraine, Russia, United Nations, with the assistance of Turkey, inked an agreement on Friday to allow exports of Ukrainian grain out of the country. That report didn't even make it a few hours before Russia bombed the major grain exporting port of Odessa. And then finally, corn and soybeans exceeded their expected ratings declines this week at down 3%, good to excellent for corn, down 2%, good to excellent for soybeans. We saw corn and soybean ratings deteriorate quickly in the western part of the country and especially in the southern states.
So I want to pick up the conversation kind of near the end there, where you're talking about, Russian, Ukrainian exports reopening a little bit, food exports, grain exports, and then, like you say, just a few hours later, it seemed like it was already going to heck again. So really, what is this doing right now to the market structure? It seems like we're getting all these big events, and eventually it just becomes normal. It feels more normal to have these what would normally be big market swinging events. So what's your picture right now as it comes to reopening trade out of Ukraine, and then kind of
Yeah.
the
So
deal that was taken with that?
as a general comment, the worst thing to do to an individual or to a country or to a group of people is to give them hope and then take it back. And I felt like that was the real downside of Friday's agreement. There was a lot of countries in the world that had hope that food, especially out of that Black Sea region, out of Ukraine, out of Russia, was going to arrive to help ease some of the hunger and some of the social unrest that we're really seeing in some of these very poor countries in northern Africa, Southeast Asia. And so there was hope, right? The United Nations had come in, had brokered a deal that was going to free up roughly about 20 to 22 million metric tons of grain that is sitting at these ports waiting for export. And within just a matter of hours, again, Russia went in and bombed Ukraine's number one port for grain exports there at Odessa. They claim it was military targeted, that they were targeting a military ship that was holding military weapons. There's a lot of debate about that. Certainly, it played out in the market. In a couple of weeks, Will, that we've seen the markets really react to some news out of Ukraine. We'd kind of become immune, I think, in the markets to some peace talks and different types of channels. But actually signing a deal with the UN caused grain prices to fall pretty heavy at the end of the week, because of the possibility of these products and these grains moving out into the world market. We rebounded quite a bit yesterday. We were up modestly in corn, wheat, and I think that was a relation not of really any other factor other than the market maybe starting to be a little hesitant that we'll see those grains exported out into the market now. So it's a very unfortunate situation, and I think for Ukraine, they had a blockade where they couldn't export any grain, but they still had their infrastructure at their port. Now they don't have a blockade, but they don't have a port. So I don't know which one's worse or better, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, it was kind of funny because it's like, the situation, it seemed like, well, hey, Ukraine, yeah, they have a box of matches, but they're underwater. And then Russia's, you know what, we're just going to take your box of matches, give you some kindling, but then now you just don't have the matches. I don't know if that's a good comparison of what's going on, but that's kind of how it felt like, and now I think you hit the nail on the head, really, when you talked about the countries that are really, waiting on getting some of that grain reopened because they're seeing, just food prices rise astronomically. There's a lot of food insecurity around the world. And then that was a little glimmer of hope, like you said. So now what happens to the economies of those countries whenever they're looking at trying to piece together enough supply to have food?
Yeah, so I think the estimate is 26 countries currently have less than half of the amount of food that they would normally have. Very very import dependent countries, especially given their proximity to some of these countries in the Black Sea, Ukraine, and Russia. The majority of their imports come from those sources, and so very dependent on imports. Very dependent on feed grains like rice and wheat and corn to help move their economy. We've seen other countries around the world step up to provide some food aid to these areas, but when we get down to it, having the ability to import product to form some form of economy that's long lasting is the long lasting solution that we'd like to see, but that's just not the case we're at today.
Well, and I guess we're pretty fortunate here in the U.S. A lot of the time, when we see things like this going on in the world, we're not necessarily going to see the same type of food supply issues or shortage. We're going to see prices rise, in all likelihood, at time, but it's not the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison. Paying more to food rather than not having enough food. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Even at the height of the pandemic, we had all this talk about lack of access to food here in the United States. And to be blunt, I never went to a grocery store, nor have I ran into anybody that during the pandemic didn't have access to some type of food. It might have not have been the exact product you were looking for. If you went to the grocery store looking for boneless pork chops, but there was a pretty good chance there was a pork chop there. And if there wasn't a pork chop, there was at least maybe chicken or turkey available. We're talking about countries that just don't have access to food. And it's not just a differentiation of product, it's don't have access to food.
So flipping gears here, one other thing I would like to talk about is, maybe on the positive side for farmers and production wise, we are seeing the price on fertilizer trending a little bit downward over the last several weeks. Can you talk about the factors that are relating to that? I know, the big rush of demand is, we're past it. We're sitting here near the end of July now, but
Yeah, no,
what's the situation?
no, that's exactly right. There's not really a place in the world right now that is absorbing huge amounts of fertilizer. We've hit this lull, if you will, in terms of there's not a lot of bids for fertilizer happening. There's not a lot of fertilizer being applied globally. I mean, you might see some countries that are planting wheat and applying some fertilizer to that wheat crop at the moment, but for the most part, demand is quite a bit lower. We've also just not had the transportation issues to the U.S. By barges and ships that we had earlier this year. So that's kind of helped alleviate some of that backlog as well. But I do expect fertilizer prices to be strong again this next year as we head into the planting season again. I do not think we've fully alleviated some of our challenges, but certainly fertilizer prices are softer today than what they were 4 months ago. So,
Well, and one of the things we've been seeing on the fertilizer side here recently is a push from several members of Congress for the president to maybe move toward more localized production of fertilizer. But at some point that you kind of hit between a rock and a hard place, maybe on what energy you're using there, and will the administration be willing to do that? So, do you see the U.S. having a decent likelihood of increasing fertilizer production? And if so, how long will that take before that actually impacts the availability of fertilizer within the market?
oh, it's not going to happen anytime soon. We're talking years before any of that would come online. And at that point, you know,
Who knows the situation?
yeah, we might not be in the same situation we are today. So it's just not a fast moving target. The other thing that's really plaguing us is there's a big misconception that we import a lot of our nitrogen based fertilizers. We produce most of those here in the United States, anyways. I mean, the vast majority. The big challenge is some of the nitrates that we can't get. Here, well, so those micronutrients that we can't get here in the United States that we just don't mine or have access to, and so we depend on other countries to provide those for us. Like Belarus is a major producer of specific fertilizers. Same way with Canada, we import a lot of potash from Canada as well, and so there's challenges in the fertilizer market, and it's what makes fertilizer different than a lot of other industries, and the fact that you can't just pop up a factory and produce anywhere. You have to have the right conditions. You have to have the markets to support that. And so it's going to be challenging for other things. Now, in terms of anhydrous, could we increase production of anhydrous here in the United States? Sure, we could. And it's one of those things that we could increase it pretty quick. Well, I shouldn't say quickly, but it's something where it's not specific to region. We could see increases in fertilizer from that source coming in a couple different spots, but it's going to take time. It's going to take years. I once heard that it takes about 4 years from start to finish to get a major facility up and running. And so I think we'll continue to see high fertilizer prices for a little longer, maybe another year.
All right. Well, some reports to watch this for the rest of this week. It seems like overall a fairly normal week. Again, we have the ethanol report coming out on Wednesday, export sales on Thursday, and then a notice on the soybean contracts coming out near the end of the week there.
One quick report, Will. This is Fed week. So the Federal Reserve has their July federal funds rating meeting this week.
I almost forgot about that.
Yeah, with their announcement on Wednesday. So the expectation is another 75 basis points here in their July policy meeting. So big week. All eyes will be on the Fed. It'll probably, I don't look for any surprises. I do expect them to go 75 basis points, but their press conference after the meeting on Wednesday, talking about long run interest rates, I think will be highly watched. I'm trying to get a sense of how high interest rates could go through the remainder of this year.
So maybe a tease for a topic that we'll talk about next week once we get the information on that, and maybe a little bit reaction there too. So Ben, well, I appreciate you joining me this morning from the road once again. Maybe one day you'll be back in Columbia, but we'll see.
I was thinking of that this morning. Well, I was trying to think of how many of these weekly webinars have I done from my office this summer, and I don't think I could count them all on one hand.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Will Robinson.